Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we will now move on to the panel discussion and introductions. So could all the panelists please introduce themselves?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. My name is Abdurrahman Al-Nimari. I have 25 years plus experience in IT and cybersecurity. I wore different hats along my career, from IT management to network administration, system administration. I'm a big fan of Linux and open source. I work both in government and in private sector. I'm so excited to be with you. Thank you for having me. And so excited to be with Dr. Erdal and Brian again besides Jeddah. Thank you very much. Happy to be with you.
Thank you, same here. Then Brian, you can be second, I guess.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Contos. I'm the Chief Security Officer with Phosphorus Cybersecurity. I've been in cyber for about 25 years. I've helped to build a number of security startups. So Veridin, which we sold to Mandiant a couple years ago, Solera Networks, Imperva, McAfee, ArcSight, Riptech. So I've been doing this way too long. I have sat on a couple of boards like Cylance and Jask and Blue Lava, and written a couple books. My last book was Physical and Logical Security Convergence, which I wrote with the former deputy director of the NSA. And very happy to be back here with a lot of familiar friends and faces.
Jakub? I think no. Sohail?
Sohail's is next.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, my name is Sohail Gohar. So I've been working in ICT 20 years plus, and then I've a couple of certifications. I've been involved in pen test, IT health compliance, and part of the senior management advisor to the board members. So that's me. And just to add, I wanted to say, Abdurrahman, I think so your camera is off. I don't know if you want to see, you can turn it on.
Maybe he doesn't want to show his face.
I'm trying to turn it off. It says that it's turned off by the host.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. There you are. We can see you.
Welcome on.
And I'm Erdal Özkaya. Currently, I'm working at Komodo Cybersecurity as Chief Information Security Officer. Like all of you, as you can see, I lost way too many hairs, way too much gray hair, which means I am a while in the industry. And I'm, as usual, as most of you, happy to see friends here, and welcome to the session. Let's start.
Okay, so the first question would be for Abdurrahman. So what to do if there is a ransomware attack? What would you say?
You are muted, Abdurrahman.
By the way, I have been watching the event since the very beginning in the early morning. I have seen Sohail talking in his first slides about ransomware. It says that 79% of malware attacks are actually ransomware in the Middle East. So we have a very big targeting. When talking about ransomware, I like to look at it from 3 different perspectives: before the attack, during the attack, and after the attack. We know that ransomware is using social engineering, phishing, stolen credentials to exploit vulnerabilities in the enterprise and encrypt our data and ask for a ransom. So we need to know before the before phase, we need to know that we have proper security controls that will protect us from the infection from the very start, so that we won't be infected by ransomware. We need to make sure that we have strict access controls based on need to know, least privilege, We need to watch our privileged accounts and manage them properly. Maybe we need to implement multi-factor authentication. I am a big fan actually of application and internet whitelisting. These controls will help prevent ransomware from accessing our critical assets. And in case there is an infection, it will help in preventing the propagation of the malware to the enterprise. It will also help preventing lateral movement. So we need to be ready before the infection to make sure that we have access controls that are planned properly and deployed properly. Next protection, I like to look at the network architecture design. We need to have a defensive architecture. We need to implement segmentation, defense in depth. I am also a very big fan of zero trust, where the user has no visibility of any asset after he connects to the enterprise, that he needs to be explicitly given access to a certain resource. This way, I think that zero trust is really improving the protection and detection capability of the enterprise. Next, we need to have a backup plan. We need to plan our backup properly. We need to test it, validate it, make sure that it can be restored. It will do what it is expected to do. We need to make sure that the backup is properly secured, so that malware will not have access to our backup. Otherwise, we will end up with having even our backup encrypted by the ransomware. And a very important aspect also is the awareness. I can't stress enough how awareness is very important in achieving security. Ransomware and even other malware is using phishing, social engineering. They are the primary attack vectors. So we need to help our user to know how to spot phishing campaigns, how to report suspicious activities, how to respond to them properly, how to be aware enough not to click on any malicious links sent to them in on email, on any messaging application, and how to be aware enough. Actually, this is in the before phase, before the attack happened. Let us say that this is our protection. What if something bad happened? If we are infected, we need to respond to the ransomware, and we need to be sure that we are resilient enough to resist the attack and keep our business operation. I was reading Mr. Alan Liska's famous book about ransomware. He was telling some scenario where a big enterprise has his ESXi infrastructure encrypted completely. Can we imagine such a thing happen to our enterprise? ESXi encrypted means that everything is stopped. So we have to be ready for this moment. We need to have a solid incident response plan with the process defined, what to do when something happens. I also like what Mr. Alan Liska mentioned in his book of integrating the IR process into the disaster recovery of the entire enterprise. Tabletop exercises are also very important. We need to make the team. I think this should be in the protection phase that I mentioned, the first one. Tabletop exercises are very important. Everyone in IT, in backup, in security, in IR team, in other business units need to understand this threat properly and need to understand his role in responding to this if anything happened attack. Okay, now the last thing that I like to talk about is the what if there is something encrypted. Now we are completely, what do we do? Can we pay the ransomware? Mr. Allen said that if you pay it, pay and pray. I still remember his phrase, pay and pray. We need to have also, I think that we need to have a policy if we choose to pay. On what conditions are we gonna to pay the ransom? And how are we going to pay it? And who is going to pay it? Are we going to have our cyber insurance do that for us? Are we going to directly negotiate with the group, or are we going to use some negotiator to do it? Some enterprises are even having Bitcoin wallets ready for such a scenario in case they need that. So we need to have a policy well-defined of the process, the how, when, and what to do if there is something something bad happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to the next question for Brian. So IoT attacks in the enterprise seem to be everywhere lately. Why is that?
I think the simplest answer is because IoT is everywhere. If you look at just the growth over the last few years, in 2017, we thought the market was big. It was about 100 billion US dollars, pretty fair size. This year, estimates are about $1 trillion US dollars. So from 100 billion to $1 trillion in just a couple short years just tells you the big picture of IoT. Now, if we think about that from number of connected devices, where you have about 46 billion plus or minus, stats on this are a little bit strange, a little bit gray, but roughly if you take the average, there's about 46 billion connected devices today. But think about this, of those 46 billion, 30 billion are IoT devices. It's about 65%. So there's a huge investment being made in IoT. These IoT devices are far more common than traditional IT devices. Now, it's just not the devices themselves, it's the data that they're transmitting, and they're being used for so many things today: agriculture, space, healthcare, industrial systems, and all throughout the enterprise. And then, of course, there's the whole consumer side, where vacuum cleaners and Alexa type devices and refrigerators and so on and so forth. But we're creating about 80 zettabytes. That's right, zettabytes of data from IoT. I had to look this up because it's been a while since I used the term zettabyte, but 1 zettabyte is about 1 trillion gigabytes. And to put that into perspective, that's about 30 billion 4K movies. And we're creating 80 of those a year with IoT data. So not only do you have all these devices, but you have a ton of sensitive information creating from these devices. And it's just not things like the door is open, the door is closed, this camera detected somebody, this system was turned on or off. There's a lot of very, very sensitive data in there. So that's kind of the landscape. So when you have such a massive landscape, of course, you're going to have people trying to take advantage of that. Now, we've done some research into this area, and a pretty good rule of thumb is per organization, there's about 5 IoT devices per person. So you have 10,000 people in a company, you probably have about 50,000 IoT devices. And generally people wouldn't think along those terms. And by the way, that's a global number. And that's for publicly traded companies, private companies, government agencies, so on and so forth, about 5 per person. Now also consider this, about half of these devices that you have in your organization have CVSS scores, critical vulnerabilities, of high and critical of 8, 9, or 10, the most grievous CVS scores you can have. So again, going back to our model, you have 10,000 people in your organization, you have 50,000 IoT devices, and out of that, 25,000 IoT devices in your organization have vulnerabilities that would allow very easy compromise and complete control of those devices. If somebody told you that about your IT infrastructure, you'd get off this call right now and you'd start running around patching and fixing these devices and trying to address this problem. But a lot of the times, organizations don't even know what they have. Who manages IoT? Is it the IT team? Is it the physical security team? Was it the facilities people that put the building together? And you start thinking about what is IoT in my organization, all the different parts. Of course, printers come to mind and video cameras come to mind. But what about all your physical access controllers, your CAC, your common access cards, your server cabinets? Those server cabinets have UPS systems and sensors and fans and cooling, tamper control, cable management, lights out management controls in the back of most enterprise computer systems, things like ILO, which HP makes, iDRAC, which is Dell, I believe, and IPMI, which is very common, that's Supermicro. These are all little Linux servers. All these, but by and large, there are some Windows, but by and large, most of these IoT devices, big and small, are little Linux servers in your KVM switches, right? In your security cameras, in your voice over IP phones. So you have thousands, if not tens of thousands of little vulnerable Linux servers all throughout your environment, usually not secured very well and running a massive number of vulnerabilities. And I like to tell people, and I'll just leave it like this, it's analogous to cybersecurity in about 1995. So those that are on this call that are old enough to remember, 1995 is when Windows NT 3.51 came out, which was roughly about the time that I started kind of getting into cybersecurity. And it was horribly attacked because it was horribly popular. And at that time, security was stuff like, don't write your password on a sticky note and put it on your monitor. That's a bad idea. It wasn't like we think of security today. So it was pretty primitive. And you had that connected to a RS-232 US robotics modem, and it went unpatched and it had poor passwords and it was easily attacked and it had so many vulnerabilities. That's what we see today with IoT. It's everywhere in the enterprise. It's very secure. Nobody's really sure what they've got. And we also know that militaries and governments and just criminal hackers are starting specifically to write malware and target IoT devices, not necessarily for the sake of attacking the IoT device, although that's very common. Let's open up all the doors in a building. Let's shut down all the power supplies in a data center. Those can be destructive attacks for sure. But they're using them to leapfrog, to spread malware, to do ransomware, phishing campaigns, to exfiltrate data. We're seeing all the traditional attacks that we saw in the IT environment now ported over to the IoT environment.
Thank you very much. So I'll move on to the next question.
Can I add to that? Sorry, Brian made a very positive point here that when IoT device is put into the corporation or organizations, most of the time people don't know who's responsible for this. So for example, IT will say, is it us? Is it cybersecurity? Is it the vendor? And like you gave the stats, I'm shocked, like 65% of the devices like IoT, and then they are brought in, there is no patching, there is no mechanism. No one is taking the responsibility. So someone needs to take that responsibility and make sure that the enterprises are secure from these devices. Just to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sahil. So yeah, as I said, the next question is for Erdal. So the question is, how do we ensure that we have the right level of skills in-house and keep them for a long time?
The first skill is to have the skill to keep the people on board. I think that's the first skill that we need to get. And for that, I think we need today, being a C-level in cyberspace is not just about technology. Brian is not just a cybersecurity expert, or Sahil is not just a manager. We all, of course, same with Abdurrahman, we all understand the technology as well as the human aspect. Otherwise, we fulfill a wrong seat. Many organizations, if you like me, travel the world, have customers in 5 continents, visit Fortune companies or small SMEs, SMBs, there is always the same thing. How can we retain talent? Or more importantly, should we train the talent? There is a famous saying, what if we train the talent and the talent leaves? And the manager says, what if you don't train them and they stay? Then we look at the attacks, you name it, from IoT to, anything, from SQL Server to Red Hat, anything. If you don't know how to manage it, then how are you going to drive it? I always give this example to my students. Get my grandmother. I mean, she's dead now. I hope she's resting in peace. But when she died, she was 98 years old. Give her the latest Ferrari or the Bugatti, you know, the $28 million Bugatti which someone bought. Give her the Bugatti. The best car in the world, you know, but someone who cannot drive it. So what can she do with it? Give Michael Schumacher a Renault Clio, you know, the small one, and let them race. Who will win in the long term? Or another example, Sohail, would you like to get a free car as a present? Komodo is going to sponsor it. You know,
maybe if I know how to drive it. If I know how to drive it.
No. I'm going to get the car, Ferrari. Okay. Komodo Cybersecurity is going to sponsor it. But you have to drive this Ferrari in a desert. Hold on, not finished. And you're responsible of the maintenance cost. No, right?
Not me.
All right. So this comes back to the talent. Now, forget what we say. Forget what Brian says. Look at the reports. Get me any report from Verizon to McAfee, from McAfee to, you know, to Microsoft. Get any report and look at the attack vectors. I'm not going to give 20%, 80%. You know, it's always misconfiguration attacks. Sohail talked about, sorry, it was Brian. Brian talked about IoT. Sohail talked about ransomware. Abdurrahman and Sohail spoke about ransomware. So when you look at this, yes, social engineering, when we look at the main factor is awareness. If we had a team trained, I'm not asking expensive sense training, which is great, but they get your leg and arm. Or I'm not saying go read my or Brian books, which is $30, $40, cheap, but you know, you have to really do your best to finish it and understand it. So I leave it up to you. It's all about, you know, keeping the talent. And for that, it comes back to us. Remember, I started being in a C-level or being a manager or being a parent. Doesn't matter what it is. Look, today, we are in a world that we deal with many dictators. They stuff up the world, not just themselves, their people, not just their people, other peoples. And I don't have to give names, but you are seeing what's happening in Ukraine. Is it because, you know, which one is easier? To train a dictator or raise children to not be a dictator? Now, roll the question back. Which one is easier? To train the talent, give them the right skills they need to their job better, because, you know, we all speak about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a changing landscape. Cybersecurity, this. But who was speaking 10 years ago about zero trust? 20 years ago, what was cybersecurity? Honestly. 30 years ago, what was cloud? 60 years ago, what was PC? 100 years ago, you know, I can just give another example. So cybersecurity or technology is a changing landscape. And to be able, you know, I'm not saying love your employee, but if you love yourself, if you love your organization, then train your employee in a way that he, she, or it, whatever it is, you know, they can manage the environment correctly. And that's not enough. Have your teams, for example, red teams, they cross-check what has been configured. It's still not enough. Get people like Brian to test what your red team is testing. Then select the right vendors. And as Abdurrahman said, you know, pray, because that's also important. Doesn't matter sometimes what you do. Like FireEye. I keep giving this example. Well, you know, really great company. Brian knows better than all of us. You know, a really great company, but they were hacked, and it was not even their fault. Supply chain attack. Sometimes, no matter what you do, you will still get the attack. But as long as, we all fall down when we learn walking. We all had bad days in our careers. We all, I'm pretty sure most of you had really bad managers. But today, we all excel in our careers. And this is because we always move forward. To put this into the question, into the context, means the biggest skill is, keeping telling this, as Steve Jobs said, we don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. Satya Nadella said something great as well, the CEO of Microsoft. It's easy to say for a beginner, but for us, people like us, don't choose your job, choose your boss, because the boss is your number one reason maybe for success or failure. Sometimes you do your best, but if the boss doesn't like you, if the boss doesn't give you the credit. So putting this into question, if the boss doesn't give you the budget for training, then what can you do? This is not enough. You can always go buy Brian's book. You can always book my book. Forget about buying books. Don't buy our books. Google it. Find it for free. I don't mind. But don't ask me, okay? Don't tell me, sorry. And go to YouTube. There is such a great resources. Invest into yourself. And long story short, security is a journey which requires probably awareness training or human interaction as number one thing. Because if we know what we're doing, like why are most of the people scared of dark? Because you cannot see, you don't know what's happening. Why most of the people are scared of death? Because they don't know what is in the other side. Some people, some religions, they believe in afterlife, hell, heaven. Some people, they believe in reincarnation. I'm not here to educate anybody. I respect everybody. But we are scared. We don't know. Same applies to technology. If you don't know what you're doing, don't touch it, it's working. Don't patch it. Don't train him, he will go. Then, unfortunately, you're going to be a black hole and not move forward. I hope this answered the question.
It definitely did. Thank you for that. So I'm going to move on to Sohail now. So the question is, should the organization be moving into the cloud and the challenges it may bring?
Thanks, Jacob. Very interesting topic. I don't know where to start, and it's a hot topic from quite a few years now. People are moving into the cloud because of cloud-first strategy, and they want to do digitalization. And I think so. It all depends on the business requirement. If there is a driver behind it, and they want to go to the cloud, they should go, but before they go, they need to do the risk assessment. They need to see if they have talent in-house or if they are bringing talent from outside, if they can help them. You need to look at different things. I'm just going to put some notes here. So before I forget, so you need to read the contract, what the contract says with the supplier, where the data is going to reside. Same principles. If you have encryption in place, do you have encryption in transit on the disks? Then if you are going to move, make sure that you align with your change management processes, where before you move any workload into the cloud, you do the risk assessment, and after you have moved it, you do the risk assessment. You do pen testing, like Article said. It's very you make sure that someone checks your work. If you have done the work, you bring in someone to check if you have done it correctly or not. Means if you don't have expertise, even if you have expertise, it's better to get it checked from someone else, because there are things you might have missed out. That's why people check. You have peer reviewers, other tech reviewers in the change management process. So then the misconception about the cloud is that it is cheap to move into the cloud. No, you have to check how much it will cost you, because disk, other things, everything, IP addresses, these things will cost you there. So you have to make sure that you are signing up for something which you can bear. I have seen people or organizations moving into the cloud and then coming back on-prem because they couldn't handle it. It was expensive. They didn't have expertise, or they end up doing wrong configuration in the cloud, and they were so scared they just decided to come back. So that's why you need to make sure that you have talent. The people you are bringing in, they know what they are doing. You need to read the contract. You need to understand the data flow. We all know, and we have read it online, by doing one toggle, someone accidentally just gave access to the AWS drive or other cloud providers. So it is very important that you know what you are doing, the configuration, and make sure that your work is being checked and properly assessed, and you do the risk assessment. Then again, same principles which we, I think, fail to follow, means make sure your endpoints, your workloads are protected when you're moving from on-prem to the cloud. Make sure that if you want to save the cost, do turn off the devices or spin them up on demand. A lot of people, they move them and leave them on, and then they get billed, and they will be surprised why we're getting billed, because if they are no longer in use, just turn them off. And just go through the basic principles. Is staff training, awareness, and doing the proper pen testing, going through the proper procedures. Means it's a long journey. Like Artika said, cybersecurity is not like one day thing. Same thing for the cloud moving. You have to draw a roadmap. You have to work on that, and then see how can you possibly move into the cloud. Most importantly, you need to see when you are signing up for the cloud, who will be responsible for data, and then if your contract ends, who will take over the data and how the data will be destroyed. So you have to be careful with that. And then you have to liaise with the local authority, check what is their requirement is. If the data is moving outside of the country where you're living, then you might need to choose a different provider who can put the data within that country, if that's your local authority requirement. So these are the golden rules which you need to follow. There are more. Yeah, I don't want to go on. I don't know if anyone else has got anything else to add. Yeah. Otherwise, I think so I'm done. Thank you.
Very small note that a lot of people think that moving to the cloud is just lift and shift. It's an easy process. They think like that, actually. So they think that it's very easy to move to the cloud. Yeah, they don't know that they should do all the stuff that you just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So the next question is for Abdurrahman. So what challenges do you see with remote working in BYOD?
Good question. Actually, BYOD became a norm after COVID-19. For example, here in Saudi Arabia, during the COVID-19 period, we didn't know that all our kids will be studying from home. And I'm really very, it was really like a miracle. I couldn't believe it, that Ministry of Education could accommodate 30 million student, teacher, manager in a remote learning platform just within weeks. They could accommodate all these things, and everybody was happy. Studying from home, teachers teaching from home, parents watching their kids from home. Everything is happening from home for those million of people. And work also, everybody was working from home during the COVID-19, which was not a short period. It was a very long one. So I think that the first step to make the best out of BYOD or remote work is to have a plan, to define the devices that will connect your enterprise. Are you allowing any type of device, or just like desktops, laptops, smart devices, phones? What compliance is required from the devices that need to connect? What type of software? How can we separate the user personal data from the corporate data, and the acceptable usage policy? A lot of things that need to be in a policy document that is communicated to everyone, understood by everyone, and enforced by everyone. As I said about ransomware, I think that zero trust will help a lot in this context. Since we're in zero trust, we are removing the parameter. All users are treated the same. So your users can connect from anywhere to access from their home, from the internet, your clients, your customers, third parties, anyone is the same. There is no parameter anyway. And the visibility of the users will be zero once they connected. I like also the adaptive process that happened during the authentication and authorization in a zero trust environment, where the context of the user is weighed and the trust is also weighed, and the user is given trust that is variable depending on the context that he is connecting from. For example, if he is calling 3 a.m. in the morning, is different from calling during the work time. If he's calling from a device that is not compliant to the corporate policy, he will be given some other changes to the policy, to the access that he will be given. So I think that zero trust will help a lot in bring your own device, and it will, as well as it will help a lot in protecting against ransomware or any other threat. There are three main concerns that I think people are most concerned about. What if the device is lost or stolen? What will happen to the data? So this can be a big concern to so many. We can implement basic controls like full hard drive encryption, remote wiping, MDM or UEM. Even UEM solution is also better to protect against this concern. Malware and data leakage is also another concern. What if the data is leaked, since the computer is always with the user? What if he copied the data or was infected by a malware? I think that there are some technical security controls, and it will be covered by MDM, UEM. What about if the user called from unsecure networks like public Wi-Fi's, airports, hotels, stuff like that? Again, if you are using, for example, zero trust, the user will be encrypted. The full communication will be encrypted using agents like connecting to the SD-WAN or VPN. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I'll move on to the next question for Brian. How is managing enterprise IoT devices different from managing traditional IT from a security perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to say some bad things about IoT devices now, more so than I did before. But before I do, I also want to make sure I emphasize this is not a hit on removing IoT devices. They provide a lot of great things, improving workforce productivity, process optimization, customer experience, remote monitoring, equipment optimization, supply chain. I think all of us kind of get the value that IoT brings. We're not saying get rid of it, but I will also say this. Some of the research that we've done, we found that 26% of all the IoT devices across the enterprise, and again, this isn't focused on the consumer side, 26%, the firmware is end of life. So 26%, you can't even update, the firmware is just dead. In some cases, the company's gone out of business. The remaining 74%, the average age of the firmware is about 6 years old. So just take your mobile phone, for example. Just think if you didn't update that for 6 years, frankly, it probably wouldn't work. Let alone provide the value you want. The other major problem we see, firmware being number one, are passwords. Half the time, passwords are default, just the default passwords, which, by the way, are very easy to Google. And if you go to Shodan, you can find a bunch of these IoT devices. You can then try the default passwords, and unfortunately, you can get in. And if they're not default passwords, a lot of the times they're very simple passwords. And they were only changed once. They were changed when that video camera was purchased, or those 20,000 video cameras were purchased, which is more the case for the enterprise, or those UPS systems were put in. Some of the older, more esoteric devices and the consumer stuff, you can only have like a 4-digit PIN. But most of the enterprise level devices, you can have alphanumeric characters, you can have special characters, you can have uppercase, lowercase, that can be 20 characters long. You can actually do robust passwords. But those tend to be the two biggies, and it's very simple. Keep the firmware up to date and keep your passwords up to date. But there's about 5 categories that I kind of put this in terms of management and why it's a little bit different. The first one is just discovery. You have to be able to figure out what you've got. And there's a lot of solutions out there that kind of do it, and they're really focused on IT, so people try to use it for IoT. But one example is like NBAD solutions. They sit there, promiscuously monitor the network. The problem is most of this communication is encrypted. So when the NBADs see it, they can't really leverage that data to tell you what's going on. The other solution is maybe use a traditional vulnerability scanner or asset management tool, but they tend to discover devices and understand what they are through malformed packets and other sort of heavy-handed approaches to analysis, which is fine if you're a big, robust database or web server. If you're an IoT device that's running kind of a slimmed-down version of Linux, which most of them are, you can probably just knock it over and kill it if you scan it too hard. And that's not what you want to do. And a lot of inventory systems I've found, actually, they just base it on the first 3 octets of the MAC. Your organizationally unique identifier, or the OUI number, which isn't a great metric to use, because some of them might say, oh, this is a JetDirect. Well, yeah, it's a JetDirect Mac, but that could be a printer, or it could be a $5 million MRI machine. And you don't really want to guess when you're doing this type of analysis, because if you want to move on to the next step, which is let's update the firmware, let's change the passwords. Boy, I sure don't want to turn my $5 million MRI machine into a printer with the wrong firmware, right? So you have to have a lot of accuracy when it comes to that. It always makes me think of Star Wars. The first Star Wars with, if you guys remember C-3PO, and they go, oh, I need an android that understands the binary language of moisture evaporators. And C-3PO is, oh, like I speak that. When you're talking to these IoT devices, you can do basic port scanning, and you can do some banner grabs, but beyond that, you really want to interrogate them in the language that they're designed to be interrogated with. And this is very, very important when you start getting into healthcare IoT, industrial control system IoT, military system IoT, in addition to the enterprise side. So you're actually gleaning the most information: serial number, model number, firmware ID, all this important information, but you're also not knocking it off. You're not breaking that machine down. So I think it's very binary. You're either 100% accurate, it's this device, this model number running this firmware. And if I'm any less than 100, I'm 0. So you have to do further interrogation. So you have to find a way to actually do robust discovery. And there are solutions out there to help with that. So that's step 1, discovery. Step 2 is, like I said, 26% of the firmware is end of life. And the rest of it is about 6 years old. So you need to be able to do firmware and patch management. Now, all of us have IoT devices at home. I have a printer sitting just a few feet from me. I can tell you right now, it's about 6 years old, and I've never updated the firmware, ever. And if I wanted to, what do I have to do? I'd have to, what is it? It's a Brother printer. I'd have to Google it and try to find where they keep the firmware and figure out, okay, how do I install this firmware? Is it a USB, or do I have to, can I do it over the internet? What's the process? That could take me hours. So you want a way to very quickly and easily update all your firmware on the devices that allow it. And again, there are some commercial level things where you have to physically be there and hold down a button and cycle the power and plug it in USB. I'm not really talking about that. When you're talking about enterprise stuff, you really should be able to update your firmware and push out like, hey, upgrade all 10,000 cameras at 6 o'clock at night on Saturday, or all the printers that are in this country or this region or this building or belong to this department. And you have to be able to do it agentless. You're not going to be able to install agents on any of these things. It has to be able to push, which is why it's so important when you're managing IoT device firmware that that discovery phase is right, because you don't want to push the wrong firmware on the wrong device. So a lot of checks and balances have to be done. So it has to be easy, and you have to be able to upgrade those devices. Now, here's an interesting thing. Let's say you're on version 3 of the firmware, but version 6 is already out. Some devices will allow you to go from 3 right to 6. Some other ones say, no, you have to go 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. So whatever solution you're using for discovery and updating your firmware, it has to have a notion of that path. So keep that in consideration when you're looking at firmware management tools specifically made for IoT. And then another neat one, we don't really think about this that much in IT, but it's the downgrade path. And a great example is Log4j, which was all the news last time this group and I got together. Let's say you're on version B of the firmware, and it has a Log4j vulnerability. And the vendor says, well, we're working to fix it, but we're not going to have version C out for a few more weeks or a month. So, okay, well, what do I do? Because I don't want to have this vulnerability out there, because again, people can go on Shodan or look for this and they'll start attacking me. Well, they go, oh, but version A doesn't have this firmware issue for Log4j. So maybe I want to downgrade to version A of the firmware, and then when version C comes out, change that. That's not thinking that we generally apply to the IT world. And it can be really a pain in the butt, to be honest, if you try to do it in the IoT world without the right tools, because upgrading and downgrading, unless it's point and click, unless it can be somewhat automated, it is a nightmare. So being able to discover your devices, number 1, being able to manage the passwords, the firmware, number 2. Number 3 is all about passwords. And again, sometimes the passwords, they're these 4-digit pins, but most of the time it's the same level of password complexity that we expect in IT. Now, the interesting thing here is if you have a way of integrating with tools like PAM tools, CyberArk or HashiVault or something beyond trust, AWS has some offerings as well, to essentially manage all your passwords for your firmware. Now you can say, all of my 50,000 IoT devices, whether they're cameras or printers or lights out or racks or UPS, I need to cycle their passwords every 30, 60, or 90 days. They need to be complex passwords. I want to have them centrally managed within, one of these PAM type solutions that can be managed maybe with my IoT management software. I want to make sure the lengths and all these things follow my corporate and regulatory mandates for my devices. So getting rid of weak passwords. Once you've found the device, once you've made sure the firmware is up to date, and then once you've made sure the passwords are strong, you've alleviated almost all the low-hanging fruit for IoT security issues. And then that just leaves a couple more pieces that you really want to cover. And those pieces are environmental drift. I just want to make sure that that thing that I've updated stays updated in perpetuity. So if something changes, and we call this the paperclip attack, because a lot of IoT devices can be hacked with a paperclip. You just go ahead and hold down that reset button for about 5 seconds. And lo and behold, that device that had a really great complex password and was on the most up-to-date version 10 of the firmware now has a password of admin, and it's on version 1 of the firmware because a malicious insider or the system got rebooted or some type of parameter changed. So have a way to monitor these devices. Once they've been updated, always interrogate them. But out of 50,000 potential devices, things like this are probably going to happen, a few of them a day. But now you can manage by exception. And you can say, oh, these are the 3 devices that we need to take a look at today. We don't have to take a look at all 50,000 devices we have. And then the last piece, of course, is reporting. What good is it if you've got this great strategy for managing all your IoT devices, you're keeping the passwords up to date, you're keeping the firmware up to date, you're constantly discovering and add it to your inventory, or you're integrating with Splunk and ServiceNow and CyberArk and all these disparate tools. But now I want to be able to report on it. I want all the data so I know all the basics. Hey, 50,000 devices. 10% of them are still on default passwords. We got to fix those. 20% of them are still on old firmware. 30% have a critical vulnerability of 8 or higher, and these types of reports. So now I'm managing my IoT just like I was managing IT, and all those little Linux servers that I have around my environment that are controlling all these major applications and systems are now secured just like my IT systems are. And if you're approaching it that way, your IT security team should be able to manage and handle the process of managing IoT just like they did for everything on the IT side. So it's actually very simple, and it's not a very complex approach if you think about it from those regards. And what we're talking about is make sure my passwords are good and make sure my firmware is patched and up to date. Those are the big pieces.
Thank you for that, Brian. I'm going to move on to the next question for Erdal. So how can cybersecurity management stay ahead of the challenges?
Good. I think, is this not the $1 million question? How can we be away from the challenges? If we challenge all the challenges, then what are we going to do for business? No, just joking. Unfortunately, currently, threat actors are a step ahead of us. If you don't believe me, look what's happening. Again, Russia versus Ukraine. The first thing that Russia did is start a cyber attack. Then they send the troops. And this is what we saw. And if you look carefully in threat reports, which was published, you will see that it's not naive. You all remember Petya, or non-Petya, whatever you want to call it. 60,000 computers destroyed within 1 hour. So back to the question, cybersecurity management challenges. I want to combine it again with all my colleagues here, what they said. Managing cybersecurity is, maybe I should also go to the question that you asked. It's like managing human. It all depends on the mood. If you're married, you know exactly what I mean. Shh, I'm working from home. Of course, same applies to them as husbands, you know. If you have kids, teenagers specifically, you still, it's a challenge. And this challenge, of course, applies to cybersecurity. But as we never give up when we're dealing with our kids, in other stuff, we should also not, of course, give up in cybersecurity challenges. The very good thing is cybersecurity challenges can be actually fulfilled much easier compared to teenager challenges. Sohail was talking about, one thing which I want to repeat is, he said the basics of cybersecurity. The basics, again, Abdurrahman said the same thing. If we could just do 3 steps, he didn't count 300,000 steps. Yes, he talked, he went to the details, but 3 steps before the attack, during the attack, after the attack. Any attack, not just ransomware. Brian talked about IoT. Before you purchase the device, while you're using the device, while you forget about the device. That's the biggest issue with IoTs, right? We forget about the devices. They're too small. Smart people can use Shodan for free, as he mentioned again. To the question, it's not easy. Look, how was this CISO for a bank? Multiple countries, one of them South Africa, one of them Ghana, one of them Pakistan, one of them UAE, 23 of them. The cybersecurity maturity level is different on each of them. And before that, when I was at Microsoft, 1 week I was in Nigeria, the second week I was in US, third week I was in New Zealand, sorry. And if you look at this, yes, they use all the same technology. Yes, I deal with cybersecurity professionals or IT professionals, but the maturity level sometimes is different. I'm not saying that A is better, C is better. And this brings other challenges. Like, it's easy for a vendor to say, don't use Windows 7. Remove Windows XP. Thank you. I still love Microsoft. I was Employee of the Year in 2017. I'm currently a Microsoft MVP in its award. I'm not, it's not my, I understand Microsoft. Microsoft has to get rid of XP because it's old, because it's easy to attack. You should use Windows 10, Windows 11 if you want security, because you cannot make Windows XP in a way that what Windows 10 is giving you. Of course, you can use products to make it better, but it's not about that. But it's easy to say use cloud. Abdurrahman spoke about it as well. Yeah, okay, use cloud. Abdurrahman, can you use in Saudi cloud for governments? What will Sama say for that? I know the answer, no, because Saudi was also my region. Or Brian is going to recommend, for example, buy a product. Yeah, good, but they are cloud-based. So how are we going to use it? Or it's easy to say patch. What if you don't know how to manage your IT? And this is where the issue lies, not knowing how to manage IT. This relies on the previous questions. I mean, sometimes we all know how to manage IT. But get any person in the world. They will talk about, keep up to date. Now, I'm asking everybody in the session, please take your phone and check if you have any updates. When did you update your app store last time? The apps in your store? Sohail, when did you update the phone last time?
This is a very tricky question. Me, I'm with patching mobiles straight away.
Beautiful. I know. You are not my target audience. Brian, when did you patch last time your modem at home? Your modem?
Never.
Because probably he's not. But of course, I'm using your name because I know Abdurrahman, Brian, Sohail. They are here because, and I know them for a long time as well. The question is actually for the people that are listening to us. You have the latest and greatest cybersecurity, but you are using an unpatched modem. Good. You think you use the same password everywhere, or you think you're smart using password manager, which I do as well, by the way. Then just a few months ago, was it KeePass, which they had an attack, which they refused, but only the master password is stolen. Hold on, that's what they need anyway. They just need the master password, the rest is easy. So it's easy to say, have password management, here 500-digit passwords. Yeah, it is easy. It's easy to say patch. It's easy to say buy. But sometimes the reality is different. And of course, it's our job. That's why Abdurrahman said something really important. He's a fan of many things, but I'm a fan of what he said, defense in depth. If you keep your valuable items next to unvaluable items, soon you're going to have more unvaluable items than valuable items because they're going to probably get lost. Same things apply. A very quick question, Abdurrahman. Where do you hide your passport? Right next to the door at home, or somewhere inside, or in a safe at home? And I know Saudi is a very secure country, by the way. Crime rate is very low, but it's a question, seriously. Where do you put your passport? Right next to the entry door, or somewhere in the bookshelf hidden? Abdurrahman?
I put it with my wife in the cabinet.
See, we even separated, or our watches, we keep separating. So same thing applies for your crown jewels. Yeah. So why are you keeping why are you keeping your valuable items next to unvaluable items? Yes, it's easy to say zero trust. I'm fond of it. Implement it. Honestly, when did you implement last time zero trust? This is a question to all of you. I repeat, it's nearly impossible to get zero trust environment and implement it to 160 years old bank from scratch. But it is possible to use the right strategy. Have a greenfield. Start from one place and move slowly. At least move your most valuable items. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's impossible to implement zero trust. If you put all this together, it's all about strategy. And I'm going to give another example from ancient history. Zhang Shu, he said that 2,000 years ago, if you want to win a war, know your enemy, but that's not enough. You have to also know yourself, but this is also not enough. You have to also know the attacking ground. If you put all this together, you are going to, you should not be afraid of any defeat. Same thing, I changed the wording. If you want proper cybersecurity, you have to start. Remember I said my first question was about education, but before actually education, you have to have a strategy. If you look at governments like America, Germany, hundreds of years old, and they all have long-term strategy. Same thing. Now, finally, they started to publish cybersecurity strategies. That's why, for example, I wrote a book with Yuri, my dear friend, called Cybersecurity Attack and Defense Strategies, because everything is based on a strategy. I want to be a CISO. Yeah, good. You know, I wanted to be CISO as well 20 years ago, but I didn't just, you know, wait for it. I worked hard. I tried to train myself. I moved roles. I had mentors. Now, after 20 years, my first CISO role was probably 4 or 5 years ago, you know. It took a while. I put a career plan or a strategy. Some of us, like, while I'm focused on my career, I also did some studies. You don't have to do studies. You don't have to be doctor or master or something, you know, but you have to build a strategy. And if you have a strategy, you will not be lost. Same things apply. I want to lose weight. Sure. But what's your strategy? Or what is your diet plan? I want to go to heaven. Sure. Each religion has their own rules. Do you pray? Do you help the poor? You don't kill. You don't lie. But I'm praying 5 times. Doesn't matter. You lie. Example, right? Or I'm going every Sunday to church. Doesn't matter. You steal. You know what I mean? It's a strategy again. And when it comes to management, to all these devices, easy, it's not. But events like this, free. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's free, right? Sometimes I speak in paid events are free. They're like, no, it's paid. It's live event. So join, learn, ask, read, research, try. And guess what? Once you have all this, you know, like, why does Sohail get more money today than he was getting 20 years ago? Because he has the experience. How did he gain the experience? While working hard. Why Brian left his country and traveled half of the globe? Why publishers trusted him to write books? Not because he has beautiful glasses, not because he's handsome, because he gained experience. And people like myself, I can show his book. It's, you know, that's my real bookshelf, by the way. That's the background. I have his book. I have my own books. I have many other books. And if you put all this, the strategy is going to be easy. Strategy can be built if you, you know, cybersecurity can be managed if you build a strategy. And with this, I think we are like a few minutes over, but let me cut it short, or a bit shorter.
I think we have time for one more question, and this would be a question for Sohail.
None of us like to speak, so.
Right, so Sohail, a question for you. So who should be responsible for the patching and how often it should be done?
Okay, I'm just looking at the time. It's a very interesting question, and I will go back again what Brian was saying about IoT devices. Like we bring in devices, again, it depends upon the processes, right? So let's say cybersecurity team, they are not responsible for patching. In my own experience, it should be the team who is managing that asset. So for example, server team, if they are managing that asset and it is under their responsibility, they should be patching it, not cybersecurity team. If firewalls are managed by the network team or security team, they should be patching it, not the cybersecurity team, because cybersecurity team have their own problems. They have red team, blue team, other problems to look at it, CVEs, management, go through that. It all depends on the company size as well. If you are within a small organization and you have less resources, then yes, maybe it is possible that same team is looking after cybersecurity as well as the patching. But if in bigger organization, I think so the relevant team should be responsible for that asset. And then other problem we have is vendors coming in, they're putting in the devices, there is no real contract or thing is put in black and white who's been responsible. They just put, like Brian said, you know, his printer is, by the way, I'm not telling loud, is 5 years old, like he didn't patch it. So we get the devices, and then vendors put them in. And MRI machines, for example, we sign the contract, they put into the hospitals or something, and then there is no one who's patching it because there is no contract, there is nothing. So clearly these things should be checked. You should have a process, and you should be challenging third party, you should be challenging internal teams. And then again, going back to others' point that we all talk about patch, but before we patch it, like sometimes in live environment, it's really hard. You need time and approval from the people because they say we are not going for downtime, it will cause disruption, it will do this. So what you have to do is test it in a test environment if you have a test environment. And before going to the production, it's very important, test it, make sure that there is nothing broken, and then you can go to the, sorry, Ardal, you have something to add.
No, strategy, right?
Yes. So yeah, it's all about your processes and strategy, and yeah, the relevant team should be there. They are the responsible of doing this. So with that, I think so we are over the time, and I will give back to you, Jacob. I don't want to take too much time. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sahel. So I just wanted to ask if there are any questions for the panel from the audience.
I have one last note, please. Speaking of zero trust, from my experience, many of the enterprises are afraid to implement the zero trust. They think that it needs special hardware, software. It's very difficult to implement it. I always tell them what Mr. Kinderwag, the father of zero trust, said once in one of his seminars. If you want to make sure that you will achieve success in your implementation of zero trust, and especially if you are scared to implement the idea. So pick your next generation firewall, connect some of the least critical systems in your enterprise to it, do some segmentation and some rules, achieve the concept of zero trust only on these systems, the least critical systems, and check your progress. See, I mean, you don't have to implement it all at once. You can start small and then you add more system as you go. You can start with least critical systems so that in case there is something bad happened or disruption, you are not stopping the business. So I think it's easy to implement zero trust if you know how to do it. Don't do it all at once. Start very small, add systems as you go. You need some time and you will be up and running, inshallah. Thank you.
So, sorry, just to add on that, it goes back to the same what Dr. Ardal said, isn't it? If you have a green field, it's easier to do. If you have old business, start somewhere small and then grow slowly. It's a journey. It's not like one day, oh yeah, I'm going to get this vendor in, I'm zero trust. No, it's a journey. You need to plan it. You need to draw the roadmap and then go through that journey and start small. And you're right. It's not just about the vendor. It is the processes and other strategy to stay.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't think we have any questions in the chat, so I think that concludes this session.